Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. So this is MSY's research notes. You can see that I just took a shower and the wet hair, the pajamas. But I think I'll still record a video and try to upload it on YouTube. But probably due to some kind of internet, failure or breakdown, probably you can see this video tomorrow. But today is June the 30th. The last day of this month, of this beautiful month, of this fruitful month. All right. So right now I am writing a meta-analysis just like what I've introduced in my previous video. And I think I'll finish it in a week's time. You can see this is like a calendar. You can see this is my plan of this week. So on from July the 6th, which is a week later, I will start to write a short paper which will be submitted and published on Eurocall's conference journal, which is also a very, very important thing for me to do. So for the following week, I think I will finish this meta-analysis. I've already finished the methodology and also the result part, and I am right now writing the literature review, I think, which is more challenging than methods or results part. Because as an undergrad student, I actually have to confess that I really lack the accumulative process of literature reading. So writing the literature review is a very, very difficult thing for me, and especially I think this part lacks some kind of framework or some kind of rules to guide me. Just like writing a method or results, you can see the very clear structure. But for the literature review, I need to figure out the logic or the structure of my literature review and how to step by step point out firstly point out some of the gaps in existing studies and find out a kind of niche for my own research, and how to point out the necessity or significance of my own research is very challenging, I think. So I'm still thinking and writing that part. So this is about my research update. But today I think I'll continue to introduce the meta-analysis which I have introduced before. You can see this one. This is the one that I've introduced, and last time I have finished the introduction part, and today I'll need to briefly introduce the literature review. You can see that the literature review, the authors, they began by telling us different sections within this literature review. They said this section reviews the existing literature on AI and GenAI applications in language education, focusing on previous meta-analysis, empirical findings, and relevant moderators. Well, first we examine blah 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 blah, parenthesis, section 2.1, and then next we discuss emerging research, and this is section 2.2. And finally, we outline key moderator variables identified in the literature and adopted in this meta-analysis to explain variability in GenAI intervention outcomes, which is section 2.3. Generally speaking, I don't think, especially in some linguistic studies, I think authors, they generally won't write a kind of overview for literature review. Well, probably this is the habit of those three authors of this study. Well, probably this is a kind of mandatory demand by this journal, Discover Computing. So I'm not quite sure whether the authors, they did this out of habit or just due to some kind of journal habits. I'm not sure, but it's not necessary, I think. So the first part, 2.1, is prior meta-analysis on AI in language education. So you need to I think be clear about the definition of AI and generative AI. I think you can see that the title of this study is generative AI effects, but here the authors, they used prior meta-analysis on AI instead of generative AI. So I think the definition here isn't very clear. Therefore, in my own study, I directly point out the definition of generative AI at the very beginning of the literature review, and then introduces or summarizes and evaluated, I think, the existing studies or theories in relation to generative AI instead of only AI. So although this, in this study, including the title and also the following methods or the results part, the authors, they used the term generative AI. They used AI application. So I think it's a little bit controversial, or, well, I think it's not a very precise expression. Generally, you can see that here they included altogether 6 different meta-analysis here. You can see here number 6 from number 1 here to number 6. So first is let me just briefly introduce, probably 1 or 2 meta-analysis. The first is the authors, they said several meta-analyses have examined AI applications in language education. This person investigated the effects of chatbots on second and foreign language learning, synthesizing 31 studies and reporting a median overall effect size. The Hadis G is 0.608, and their analysis identified modality, mobility, and involvement of GenAI and the type of comparison group as significant moderators. So the first meta-analysis included here is about chatbots, but chatbots is not generative AI, or not all the chatbots is based on generative AI. This is a very clear distinction, which has been pointed out in my own study. Chatbots, a lot of chatbots are rule-based, based on corpus. Based on corpora, not corpus. Excuse me, grammar mistake, but hope you can understand it. So, since this article, based on the title, based on the following coding manuals or coding schemes, I think the authors, they focused on generative AI. So this is the same question that I want to ask. Why point out AI applications here in the literature review? Is a little bit confusing, I have to say. So this is the first meta-analysis that they included. The second is another person, I think probably from South Korea, conducted a meta-analysis on machine learning-based translation tools. You can see here that the authors, they included a kind of machine learning-based translation tools, which is absolutely different from generative AI tools. I don't know why. The same question as the first one. And the third is examine the relationship between intelligent tutoring system and reading comprehension out to context. So what is the definition of intelligent tutoring systems? Probably this is not generative AI, or probably this is, but I'm not sure. Based on this name, you can never tell. So generally, the authors, they just listed all those 6 different meta-analyses. I don't quite understand I don't quite understand the logic of this section 2.1. But this is also good news. Why is it good news? Because I think this study, I have to say something very critical. because this study, I think, hasn't fully demonstrated the writing skills or writing techniques that the authors, I think, they should have mastered, especially as professor or doctoral students. So I think generally literature review, especially for journals, it serves as a kind of section leading to the research questions, or the purpose of the literature review is to point out the importance of your research questions and also find a niche of your research question in the overall academic community to point out how to make a conversation with the previous studies, with the existing theories. However, only listing meta-analysis here, it's not enough, and it failed to serve for the purposes necessary in the literature review part, I think. So here then we move to 2.2, the generative AI in language education. I don't quite understand why they put AI first, because their article is about generative AI. So I think they should just drop AI in 2.1. It's not associated with your question. So 2.2 is generative AI. In the first paragraph, they point out, compared with some traditional tools, they introduced the generative AI's advantages or some pedagogical potentials. So, quote, GenAI builds upon decades of research in educational technology, including early developments in chatbots, automated feedback tools, and intelligent tutoring systems. Although these early tools focused on specific tasks like writing evaluation or grammar correction, recent advances in large language models have enabled more interactive, dynamic, and context-aware learning experiences. Due to this shift, GenAI is now positioned as an effective tool for language learning that is capable of simulating conversation, promoting learner autonomy, and on an unprecedented scale, and providing personalized, on-demand feedback. All right, so this is the comparative advantages. The comparative advantages of generative AI. I think this paragraph, the authors they write in this way. I think they just want to probably tell the readers that generative AI has a good effect on second language learning, because they ask the overall effect of generative AI in their research questions. So probably literature review need to point out that Gen AI is better than some traditional digital tools, I think. So this is the function of the first paragraph, I guess. And the second is they compared traditional teaching methods with Gen AI teaching methods. So Gen AI introduces a more dynamic and responsive approach to language education. So this is the second paragraph. All right. So they moved to the comparison between instructions or pedagogical methods. Right. It's also a comparison. And third paragraph is another systematic review about generative AI utilization in language education. So it's a systematic review, but you can see that while I am reading or while I am introducing this study to you, you can see that my expression is not very fluent because I'm thinking. And another reason is that their logic flow is to some extent not very logical, or I cannot fully follow what they're writing about. But why I choose to introduce this paper is because it is closely linked to my own research, and this is one of the references that I think my study is based on. At least the methods or the moderator or the coding scheme indeed inspired me a lot. But the literature review part, I think I learned, you know, very limited, a very limited number of things from the literature review. I have to say. Then, well, let me see the following paragraph. Then the authors, they just pointed out some kind of specific tools within the large domain of generative AI. They point out ChatGPT and quoted several studies introducing ChatGPT's effects. Well, it's hard to understand. Yeah. So I'll just dump this part. Okay, so the next paragraph is the combination of GenAI and also other product-based learning approaches. Product-based learning approaches, it's the integration of this technology into the existing teaching methods, which is a very common and normally seen way of instruction, I think, especially in reality. I mean, in reality is relative to experiments or experimental circumstances or experimental design. It's just something happening in the real classrooms, in everyday classrooms. All right, so the paragraphs above generally mention the language proficiency domain. The next paragraph, the authors, they transferred to affective and like cognitive domains. Generally, they just quoted a lot of studies here to tell the readers that GenAI is absolutely helpful for some kind of learner psychology outcomes. But do you notice that, firstly, GenAI is absolutely helpful, indeed. But if it is absolutely helpful, so why do you need to make a meta-analysis? There must be something controversial within the existing studies. Therefore, based on this mixed picture, you make a meta-analysis to draw a conclusion based on data. But since you have already introduced all those positive outcomes, all those positive effects of GenAI, so why bother making or conducting a meta-analysis is not necessary. Or what I want to say here is that probably in the literature review, you need to include some controversial studies here instead of only telling the readers how brilliant generative AI has been. So this is my criticism, right? Well, so this is about 2.2. I think indeed they point out some limitations, but that's just 2 paragraphs. That's not enough. is not a thorough investigation of the limitations of generative AI. Right. So this is what I'm thinking. And 2.3 is moderators considered in this meta-analysis. Firstly, they point out why analyzing moderator is analysis. Is necessary. Why this analysis is necessary, and then they just, you can see here, moderator 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. So this is like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They just listed altogether 10 moderators, and at last is a summary or a conclusion, or I have to say the summary because it's just summarized all those moderators here. And if you have a closer look how they pointed out different moderators one by one, you'll notice that they generally just quote a study and then tell the readers that their findings of the study, and then some kind of interpretation of the finding. For example, quote, highlighting the need for motivation measures tailored to AI-enhanced environments. Building on this, the present study includes instructional setting as a moderator to compare the impact of GenAI in formal versus informal learning context. It's just like putting a study on the top of a paragraph and then introduce the findings and then discuss the finding and directly point out that, yeah, we are going to analyze this moderator. It's not wrong, but it's not a well-written, I think, not a well-written paragraph or section. So this is all I want to say about the literature review part. It's not a bad study, it's just mediocre. Well, I actually don't know what to say, or probably one day if my study is successfully accepted by like a journal, well, I hope that I can introduce my study and introduce how I organize the logic of literature review, which I think is better than this one. So, well, tomorrow I need to get up earlier and also continue my study because I have just wrote down like 2 or 3 paragraphs in the literature review, so my time is quite limited. I only have a week's time to finish the literature review and also the discussion part. Just remember, I've just finished methods and results. So time is indeed very limited, and I hope to finish the literature review within 2 days, and discussion another 2 days, and then I'll write the abstract or conclusion or other things, and that will be the end of my research. All right. So tomorrow, hopefully, I can just update my research advances. And hopefully I can bring you some good news. All right. So this is the end of today, and this is MSY's Research Notes. See you tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.